I'm Bill Shepard. I'm with the Arkansas Natural Heritage Commission, an agency of the Department of Arkansas Heritage. And this is Roth Prairie, 40 acres of virgin grassland which has never been plowed in Arkansas County. The Natural Heritage Commission acquired this prairie in 1976 and has been managing it with fire ever since that time. For many years before the state acquired Roth Prairie, it was hayland. Every year it was mowed, and that kept it in grass so that the trees didn't overtake the wildflowers. And since the time the state has owned it, we have managed it mostly by burning. More about that later. Right here next to me is one of the tallest grasses in the prairie. This is big bluestem, and this specimen is taller than I am, and I'm 6 feet tall. The pioneers talked about riding their horses through the prairie, and the grass was as tall as they were even on horseback. It's not quite that tall here today, but it's at least as tall as I am standing up. Another name for big bluestem grass is turkeyfoot. And you can see why, because the little seed head looks a little bit like the footprint of a wild turkey in the mud. Here you can see why this grass is called bluestem, because parts of the stem really do look blue at this time of year. It doesn't look blue in the spring, and it doesn't look blue when it's dead in the wintertime, but it does in September when the grass is blooming. Here's a little bluestem. It's not blooming yet, and it's only waist high. But as you can see, it too has a bluish cast to the stem at this time of year. It's one of the 4 major prairie grasses along with big bluestem, which reaches more than twice the height of little blue. Here's Indian grass. It's another one of the 4 major prairie grasses. And this one can reach heights equal to those of big bluestems, 7 or 8 feet, though this one hardly comes to my chin. You can see that it's blooming because the yellow anthers are hanging out of the flower head. So it's blooming right now in mid-September. And it's certainly one of the prettiest grasses on the prairie, or at least it is to my way of thinking. Here is switchgrass, the last of the 4 major grasses of the tallgrass prairie. It has a very diffuse head, and many of the seeds have already scattered, but some of them are still clinging to the stems on which they were born. Here's a little green tree frog, an insect-eating animal that lives in the prairie, and he's protecting himself with his camouflage, his green color, from being attacked by a large bird or other animal that might want to eat him. On his feet he has little sucker pads, and that makes it possible for him to climb the grass stalk. This grass is PINEYWOODS dropseed. Of course, this is not a piney woods, but that's the typical habitat of it. It's a rare plant in Arkansas, and certainly one of the rarest plants on Roth Prairie. It has very narrow leaves, and it blooms in the fall, from September through December. If you look at the height of these grasses, something tells you that this is very rich soil. And that's the reason why most of these prairies got plowed up and planted in various field crops many, many years ago. Only a few places like Roth Prairie were preserved for one reason or another, perhaps because the family appreciated its heritage of prairie vegetation. And now these are the only places we have that can give us an idea of what the Great Prairie used to look like 500 years ago when only the Indian was here, the Indian and the buffalo. Here's a big patch of sunflowers. There are several different kinds of sunflowers that bloom on the prairie depending on the time of year. This one is in full bloom right now, and the compass plant, another sunflower, has already passed in the summertime. And then later on there'll be still other sunflowers in October. Now I'm standing in a big patch of wildflowers on the prairie, and you can just hear the bees buzzing all around. This plant right here is a goldenrod, but it's not just a goldenrod. This is a special goldenrod. Its name is sweet goldenrod because if you break off a leaf and crush it and smell it, it smells just like licorice candy. You can also make a tea. The pioneers used to do that. They made a tea from the leaves of this goldenrod. Here's ironweed. It's a plant that peaked with lots of purple flowers in August, and there are just a few of them left. Many members of the daisy or sunflower family have white down on their seeds, but ironweed is different. Its plant down is brown. Here's narrow-leaved sunflower, which is just starting to bloom now. It'll reach its peak of bloom in early October. As you can see, the individual leaf is extremely long and narrow. Here are some seed pods of white false indigo which bloomed in the spring. This time of year it makes a rattle. And you can open a pod and see the little seeds inside. Here are some pretty wild asters blooming on the prairie in the fall. Here is prairie spurge. It's a milky white wildflower of summer. It is abundant on the prairie, and this one's just a little late, still blooming in September. This spot, which in the fall is occupied by grass-leaved goldenrod, little bluestem, and switchgrass, had totally different species of plants growing here last spring. There's no trace of them here now, and there will be no trace of these plants here next spring. That's the way they managed to live in the same place at different times of the year, and there's always a good vegetative cover, but it changes as the year goes by. One thing in the spring, something else in the summer, something else again in the fall. Prairies always have a problem with woody plants that want to invade, and if they get their way, then you eventually won't have prairie anymore. You'll have a forest instead. Here's a big clump of sassafras that's tried to get away from us. But if you look carefully, you can see that we're gaining on it. The stems that are tallest are dead, and those are the ones that grew last year and were burned last fall or winter when the prairie was burned. This year's stems are not able to reach as tall as last year's stems did. That shows that we're getting ahead of the problem and the sassafras is not getting ahead of us. Here's the fuel that is going to support the fire. Dead grass, even grass that's not dead, old bird nest. This is called litter, and it's all fuel for combustion. The fire crew behind me is burning what's called a black line. This makes a fire break, and it will eventually be the end of the head fire that will burn most of the prairie. John Logan is using a drip torch which dribbles flaming kerosene into the grass and sets it on fire. What we're doing here is making a backfire, setting a fire along the trailing edge or the leeward edge of the prairie next to a mown strip, and this will be forming a fire break for the head fire that will come along later. He's putting the fire out with water sprayed from a backpack sprayer, and that's going to keep it from crossing the fire break. This fall burn is being conducted to serve 4 purposes. First of all, to kill the woody plants that would invade the prairie, primarily sumac and sassafras in this case. to consume the dead plant matter or litter, which forms a mulch and accumulates on the prairie, to recycle nutrients, which in the form of ash will be able to fertilize the roots for next year's plant growth, and finally to expose the soil to the sun so that early next spring everything gets growing faster than it would if the prairie hadn't been burned. So here's the ash, one of the final products of the burn. It consists of soluble oxides and salts of potassium, calcium, manganese, and other minerals which are essential for plant growth, and because they're water soluble, they'll be readily assimilated by the roots of the plants next spring. Today we're back at Roth Prairie in the spring to see what the effect was of the fire several months ago. We'll be able to see how the growth of the plants has been stimulated by the fertilization from the ash that was deposited after the fire. Most of the plants on the prairie are not woody, but the sensitive-brier is a woody plant that's here. It's got little briars along the stem that'll grab your finger if you try to run your finger along the stem. And the reason it's called sensitive is because if you touch the leaf, the leaves will fold up. The flower shows that it's a relative of the mimosa tree and has a very pleasant smell as well. Here is a milkweed plant, and there is a caterpillar on the milkweed, and I believe this particular caterpillar is a caterpillar of the monarch butterfly. Both the milkweed and the butterfly have chemicals in them that are poisonous and taste bad, and that's not an accident because the caterpillar takes poisons out of the plant when it eats the leaf, and that provides protection to the butterfly, and birds and other predators won't want to eat a monarch butterfly because they have a bad taste that will make the bird sick if it eats the butterfly. This plant just starting to bloom is Arkansas SNEEZEWEED. Until a few years ago, it had never been collected outside of Arkansas, which made it a state endemic plant. Recently, it's been reported from a place or two in northern Louisiana, but it's an example of a rather unusual situation where the range of the plant roughly approximates the boundaries of the state of Arkansas. This white flower here is a beardtongue. This colorful wildflower here is smooth phlox. Very rich pink. This tall perennial is white false indigo. The flowers come out of the top of this plant, whereas the flowers of the cream-colored false indigo come from the sides below the leaves of the plant. Another member of the bean family. Here are some green seed pods of the cream false indigo, which has already finished blooming this spring. Right now the pods are full of air, but seeds are forming inside the pods. Here is SCURF-PEA, another spring wildflower of the prairie. It belongs to the bean family, like the false indigo, and it's particularly a close relative of alfalfa. Like all the members of that family, it enriches the soil by fixating nitrogen from the air. This plant, just starting to bloom, is mock bishop's weed. It has a very fine leaf, rather like asparagus, and it's closely related to Queen Anne's lace, carrots, parsley, and the like. Here, hiding close to the ground, is one late flower of yellow stargrass. Here is a big stink bug on the leaf of an ironweed plant. This flower is spiderwort. It's called that because of these long bracts that stick out below the flowers. Remind you a little bit of spider's legs. It has a very pretty flower that varies in color from pale blue to deep purple. I'm standing in a big patch of a white flowered plant named FEVERFEW. The flowers of FEVERFEW are heavy and dense, and they've always reminded me of heads of cauliflower, little heads of cauliflower. And each little head typically has 5 points. Here are the golden flowers of lance-leaved COREOPSIS, a plant that's familiar from roadsides as well. Here are some wild roses. They have only 5 petals, unlike the double roses that are what you see mostly in cultivation, but they smell just as sweet, and they also have thorns. And they're a woody plant, a very low shrub. And here are a couple of rosebuds, a deeper pink than the open flower. This is a big thicket of sassafras here, which was damaged by the fire a few months ago. It didn't kill the plant entirely because young sassafras leaves are already this tall, and they've come back from the roots, but they're not as tall, or at least not as tall yet, as the stems that were killed by the fire. Another benefit of the fire is how green the leaves of everything are. Their growth has been stimulated by the ash from all the leaves that were burned in the fire. Thanks for coming today.